Welcome back to Void Stories, where darkness whispers and every secret awakens.
His name was Marcus. That's what he told me when he reached out. First name only, which I respected. He lived in a mid-sized town in the Pacific Northwest, in a house he'd bought with his wife 3 years before any of this started. 2 kids. A golden retriever named Biscuit. A backyard that backed up against a thick wall of Douglas fir trees that stretched for about half a mile before hitting a service road. By every measure, it was a good life. The kind of life people spend decades working toward. Quiet street, good school district, the kind of neighbors who wave from driveways and return packages left on your porch. Marcus told me he used to sit on his back deck every evening with a cup of coffee, just watching the light change through the trees. He said it was the part of his day he looked forward to most. I want you to hold on to that image. The coffee, the golden hour, the trees. Because that same view is what started all of this. It began in early October. Biscuit, who, by all accounts, was the most sociable, unbothered dog Marcus had ever owned, stopped going near the back fence. Not gradually, not hesitantly, overnight. One evening, she was chasing squirrels along the tree line like she always did, and the next morning, she planted herself in the middle of the yard, stared toward the fence for a long moment, then turned around and went back inside. Marcus didn't think much of it at first. Dogs are weird. Anyone who owns one knows this. They bark at walls, refuse to enter certain rooms, develop inexplicable opinions about specific pieces of furniture. So when Biscuit started sleeping closer to the front of the house and side-eyeing the back door like it had personally offended her, Marcus chalked it up to animal quirk and moved on. Then the motion light started triggering at 3 a.m. Their backyard had one of those standard floodlights mounted above the back door, the kind that clicks on the second anything larger than a cat enters the sensor range. For 3 years, it had gone off for exactly the reasons you'd expect. Biscuit, raccoons, the occasional deer wandering up from the tree line. But in early October, it started activating at the same time every night, not at dusk, not at random hours. 3 in the morning, give or take 15 minutes, like something had set a calendar reminder. Marcus checked the yard each time. Nothing. He adjusted the sensor sensitivity. Still nothing. He told his wife it was probably a glitch, a temperature differential triggering the sensor as the nights got colder. She accepted that. He almost believed it himself. Almost. On the 4th night, instead of going back to sleep, he pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. They had a basic security camera mounted near the motion light, nothing fancy, the kind you pick up from a big box store for $80. He'd never had reason to review the footage before. He had reason now. He found the timestamp, scrubbed to 3:08 a.m., and pressed play. For the first 11 seconds, the yard was empty. Then the motion light clicked on, and there, at the very edge of the camera's range, right where the manicured grass met the dark line of trees, was a shape. Tall, still, not moving toward the house, not moving at all, just standing there, at the tree line, facing the house. Marcus told me he watched the clip 4 times before he could process what he was looking at. He kept expecting it to resolve into something logical, a shadow, a trick of the light, the outline of a particularly upright shrub he'd somehow never noticed. But every time he watched it, it looked the same. A figure, standing, watching. It stayed for 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Then the motion light clicked off, the yard went dark, and when it triggered again 2 minutes later, the tree line was empty. He didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, Marcus told himself it was a person cutting through the property. Trespassing, sure, but not unheard of in an area backing onto a service road. He made a mental note to look into fencing options and tried to put it out of his mind. But that night he stayed up, and at 3:11 a.m., the motion light clicked on again. Same spot, same stillness, same figure. He watched it on his phone in real time this time, standing in his dark kitchen, not sure whether he wanted to go outside or never go outside again. The figure didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there in that particular way that felt less like loitering and more like observing, like it was cataloging something. This happened for 7 consecutive nights. On the 8th day, Marcus decided to do what any reasonable person who has completely run out of rational explanations does. He went to look. It was a Sunday afternoon, full daylight, his wife inside with the kids. He crossed the yard, unlatched the gate in the back fence, and pushed through into the narrow strip of underbrush between the lawn and the trees. He told me he wasn't scared, exactly. More like resolved. He wanted to find a deer trail, a gap in the fence some neighborhood kid was using as a shortcut. Anything that would give this a clean and boring explanation. What he found instead stopped him cold. The grass at the tree line, that borderland strip of scrubby ground between the manicured lawn and the forest floor, was flattened. Not like an animal had bedded down. Flattened in a rough standing shape. The kind of compression that comes from something standing in one place long enough to leave an impression. And around it, arranged without any obvious logic but arranged nonetheless, were 4 objects. A small red toy truck, one of his sons, a child's knit glove, pink, with a small embroidered star on the back, his daughter's, a coffee mug, his wife's, the one she'd reported missing from the back deck 2 weeks ago, and a single photograph, face down in the dirt. Marcus turned it over. It was a picture of his family, taken from outside the back fence. Recent. His daughter was wearing a jacket she'd only gotten in September. He stood there for a long time. He said the world went very quiet. On his way back inside, moving faster than he'd like to admit, he passed his neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Hartley, who'd lived on that street for over 30 years. She was standing at the edge of her driveway, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. When their eyes met, she didn't smile or wave the way she normally did. She just said quietly, "You saw it too, didn't you?" Marcus didn't answer. She nodded once, slowly, like his silence was confirmation enough, and went back inside without another word. He called the police that afternoon. They took a report, walked the tree line, found the flattened grass and the objects. They told him to call if anything escalated and suggested he consider upgrading his security setup. They did not seem particularly surprised, which Marcus found more unsettling than anything else about the interaction. That night, and every night for the following 2 weeks, Marcus stayed up watching the camera feed. The figure never came back. He told me he didn't know whether to feel relieved or more afraid. Because here's the thing about something that stops. It means it got what it came for, or it decided to move on, or it's simply waiting for you to stop watching. And you can't know which one it is. You just have to keep checking the camera and hoping the tree line stays empty. The objects were kept by police as part of the report, except for the photograph. They left that with him. He threw it away the same day, then spent the following week wondering if that had been the right call. I asked Marcus one last question before we ended our conversation. I asked him if he'd spoken to Mrs. Hartley again, if he'd ever asked her what she meant, what she'd seen, how long she'd known. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knocked on her door the week after. She didn't answer. I've knocked 3 times since then. She never answers. But her car's always in the driveway." He paused. "I've stopped knocking." Story 1 ends there. Story 2 is worse. Because this time, it wasn't just watching. I want you to picture the kind of backyard that makes people stop mid-conversation at a house viewing and say, "This is the one." That was our backyard. A wide, generous stretch of grass that rolled gently down toward a tree line of old-growth oaks, the kind of trees that had been there long before the subdivision, long before any of us. There was an old swing set near the left fence, weathered wood, slightly creaky, the kind that kids love precisely because it feels a little dangerous. A vegetable garden my wife had started the second summer we moved in. A fire pit we used every weekend from September through November. In the evenings, after dinner, our kids would just be out there, running, arguing about nothing, feeding grass through the fence to the neighbors' horses. The dog, a 3-year-old border collie named Scout, would tear figure eights across the lawn until he was too tired to stand, then collapse in the last patch of golden light like he'd personally earned it. The smell of cut grass, the sound of the kids laughing over nothing, the way the tree line turned amber at dusk like something out of a painting. My neighbor Dale used to joke, "You've got the best lot on the block." He wasn't wrong. At the time, I'd moved my family there for exactly this. The space, the quiet, the feeling that the world stopped at the fence line and everything inside it was ours, safe, contained, known. My wife called it the exhale house, the place where you finally stop holding your breath. We'd worked hard for it, and we knew it, and every evening I'd stand on that back deck with a drink in my hand and feel something I can only describe as deep, uncomplicated peace. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what it felt like before. I need you to feel comfortable here, in this yard, with these people, under these trees. Because what I'm about to describe will be worse if you do. It started with Scout. He was not a nervous dog. He was not the kind of animal that barked at shadows or startled at loud noises or refused to enter rooms for mysterious reasons. He was steady, confident, almost embarrassingly well-adjusted for a border collie. My kids could dress him in Halloween costumes, and he'd sit there with the dignified patience of a dog who had made his peace with human absurdity. So when he stopped going near the back fence, I noticed. But I didn't notice. You know the difference. The first time, I figured he'd gotten spooked by something in the tree line. A fox, maybe, or a raccoon. Animals have their territorial signals, sounds and smells that we're completely deaf and numb to, but that dogs receive like emergency broadcasts. I let it go. Second time, I called him toward the fence, and he came about halfway, then sat down and refused to move forward. Tail low, ears flat, eyes fixed on the trees like he was reading something written there. I let it go again. Then the motion light started triggering at 3 a.m. The first night, I assumed it was a deer. They came through occasionally, especially in the fall, pushing up from the lower woods toward the neighborhood. I checked the yard from the bedroom window, saw nothing, went back to sleep. The second night, I was more annoyed than concerned. I had an early meeting. I needed the sleep, and the sudden flood of white light through the curtains felt like a very personal offense. I went downstairs, looked out the back door. Empty yard, quiet trees, nothing. The third night, I checked the camera. We had a basic security setup, one camera above the back door, wide angle, decent night vision. I'd bought it after a neighbor's garage got broken into 2 years prior, and honestly forgotten it existed for most of the time since. I scrubbed back to 3:06 a.m. and pressed play. For a few seconds, just the yard. Then the light clicked on, and at the far edge of the frame, right where the lawn met the tree line, right at the boundary of what the camera could clearly resolve, there was a shape. Tall, upright, perfectly, completely still. I watched it for a full 30 seconds before I fully accepted what I was seeing, because my brain kept reaching for alternatives. A shadow from a moving branch. The silhouette of a fence post I'd never noticed at that angle. Anything, but it wasn't any of those things. It was a figure standing at my tree line at 3 a.m, facing my house. It stood there for just over 7 minutes. Then the motion light timed out, the yard went dark, and when it triggered again 4 minutes later, the tree line was empty. I almost deleted the footage. I'm glad I didn't. And after you hear what happened next, you'll be glad too. I went out there on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after the footage. I want to be honest about that gap. It wasn't courage that made me wait, and it wasn't wisdom. It was the very human instinct to let something terrifying become something manageable through the simple passage of time. By day 12, I'd almost convinced myself it had been a person cutting through the property. Trespasser, sure. Unsettling, sure. But explainable. I told myself I was going out to look for a gap in the fence. A trail. Anything that gave this a clean, boring story I could tell myself before bed. My wife was inside with the kids. It was mid-morning, full daylight, birds making noise in the canopy. I unlatched the back gate and pushed through into the narrow strip of scrubby ground between the lawn and the first row of trees. The underbrush was thin there. You could see maybe 20 feet into the woods before it got dark. I almost missed it because I was looking for a fence gap and not looking at the ground. But something made me stop. The grass at the tree line was wrong. Flattened, not in the scattered, irregular way of bedded down animals, but in a rough vertical compression, the kind of shape that comes from something standing in one place long enough to leave a mark. I stood there looking at it for a moment. Then I looked at what was around it. For objects, arranged in a loose cluster in the flattened grass. A toy dump truck, yellow plastic, my son's, missing from the yard for at least a month. A small knit glove, purple with white stripes, my daughter's. A water bottle with my wife's name written on the lid in marker. And a folded piece of paper, which I unfolded with hands I will admit were not entirely steady. It was a photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly blurry, taken from outside the back fence looking in. My family in the yard, my wife gardening, my kids on the swing set, Scout running laps, me on the deck with my coffee, completely unaware. The metadata timestamp in the corner put it at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. 3 weeks ago. A completely normal evening I remembered exactly and had felt completely safe during. I folded it back up. I walked back through the gate. I lashed it behind me, though it felt like a meaningless gesture by that point. Old Mrs. H from 2 doors down was standing on the sidewalk as I came around the side of the house. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't name. Not quite concern, not quite recognition. Something older than both. She said, real quiet, "You saw it too, didn't you?" I didn't know what to say. She just nodded and went back inside. I called the police that afternoon. They came, they documented, they walked the tree line and took the objects as potential evidence. They told me to call if anything developed and suggested better lighting. The figure never came back. Not once in the months since. I've thought a lot about why it stopped. Maybe it was the police report. Maybe it was the daylight visit. Maybe being seen in the act of looking changed something. Or maybe it found what it was looking for, decided it knew enough, and simply moved on to someone else. I don't know which answer is worse. Story 1 ends there. Story 2? Story 2 is worse. Because this time, it wasn't just. This one was sent to me by a woman I'll call R. She reached out through the channel submission form about 4 months ago. A long, carefully written message that took me 3 reads to fully process. Not because it was confusing, because it was precise. The kind of precise that comes from someone who has gone over the details so many times in their own head that they've worn grooves into them. Or lived on a rural property in the Mid-South. 5 acres, old farmhouse. The kind of place that takes a full minute to drive from the road to the front door. Her backyard, if you could even call it that, given the scale, was a sprawling stretch of open land that rolled back toward. Kind of thing. By the time our family moved in, It had been largely retired. The mower lived in the garage now. The shed just sat there, padlocked, ivy climbing its south-facing wall, looking like something out of a children's book illustration. Weathered gray wood, a little crooked, charming, in the way that old neglected things sometimes are when they're not yet yours to worry about. Or told me she loved it at first, that she'd had vague plans to clean it out, paint it, turn it into a potting shed or a reading nook. Something lovely. She just never got around to it. The first thing she noticed was the padlock. Not missing, just different. Hanging at a slightly different angle than she remembered. She couldn't be certain. She had no reason to be looking at it closely before. She filed it away as nothing and went back inside. Then she noticed the smell. Faint, sour animal, coming from the direction of the shed on still mornings. Then she noticed the tools had moved or was not the kind of person who spooked easily. She'd grown up on a farm. She'd lived alone through her 20s. She was the person in her friend group who got called when something needed handling. So when she started noticing the changes, her first instinct wasn't fear. It was documentation. She started keeping a log. Nothing elaborate, just notes in her phone. Padlock facing left again. Smell stronger this morning, coming from the side vent. Trowel moved from right side of door to left. Small things, individually dismissible, but accumulating with a persistence that made the back of her neck prickle in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. 3 weeks into the log, she propped her phone against the fence post facing the shed, set it to record overnight, and went to bed. She almost didn't check the footage. She told me that she woke up the next morning fully prepared to find 8 hours of absolutely nothing and feel slightly embarrassed about the whole exercise. She made coffee. She essay. When the door opened from the inside, not swinging wide, not dramatically, just opening, for maybe 5 inches, enough to suggest someone checking whether it was safe to come out. It stayed like that for almost 2 minutes. Then it pulled slowly shut again. I called her husband at work. She described what she'd seen. She sent him the clip. His exact words were, "It's probably a raccoon." Reader, it was not a raccoon. She set the camera up again the next night. And the night after that, the door opened at 2 a.m. both times. The same cautious, deliberate movement. On the third recording, just before it pulled shut again, she could see in the narrow gap between door and frame the faint, unmistakable outline of a human hand gripping the interior handle. She stopped sleeping well after that. The lights in the bedroom stayed on. She started doing head counts at night. Kids in their rooms, husband accounted for, all doors locked. She began moving through her own home with a new and horrible awareness. The feeling of being in a place that had been compromised in some way she didn't yet fully understand. She told her husband again, showed him the hand. He went pale. He suggested calling the police, then talked himself out of it. What would they say? Someone might be using our shed? It sounded insufficient. It sounded like something that wouldn't be taken seriously until something serious happened. So I called her brother instead. What she found inside the shed is the part of this story I debated whether to share. I went back and forth on it for a long time. But you need to know, because the full picture of what was in that shed is what turns this from a disturbing story into something that keeps me staring at ceilings. Her brother drove 4 hours to get there. That's the kind of family I came from. You call, they come, no questions asked until they're standing next to you. He arrived on a Wednesday morning, and the two of them walked across the property together toward, or had the key to the padlock. She'd had it the entire time, sitting on a hook in the kitchen, never used. Her brother stood slightly in front of her. She unlocked it. He pushed the door open. The smell hit them before anything else. Not mildew, not animal. Something human. Something lived in. The interior of the shed was roughly 10 by 12 feet. It held, or had held, yard equipment, but most of it had been pushed to the sides and back, clearing a central space. In that space, a sleeping bag laid out on a folded tarp, a camping pillow, a cardboard box serving as a shelf, holding a battery-powered lantern, 2 water bottles, a bar of soap, and a toothbrush. Stacked near the far wall, flattened and sorted with a neatness that somehow made it worse. Months of food wrappers, protein bar packaging, empty cans with their lids folded back. Someone had been living there. Not camping, not hiding temporarily. Living. With a system. With a routine. R's brother found the journal on the second pass, tucked into a weathered canvas bag hanging from a nail on the interior wall. Spiral-bound, water-stained, nearly full. He opened it to the first page. The earliest entry was dated 11 months prior. The journal was not a diary in any conventional sense. There were no reflections, no emotions, no personal narrative. It was observational, systematic, recorded in small, neat handwriting that covered every page margin to margin. R's name appeared on the first page, followed by her husband's, followed by her children's. Their full names, their ages. What followed was months of documentation. The time are left for work each morning. The days the kids had after-school activities. Her husband's recurring late nights on Thursdays. Which lights in the house went off last at night. Where the spare key was kept. Which neighbor's dog barked when cars entered the street, and which one didn't. R's brother read through it in silence, turning pages slowly. He got to the last entry, and she watched. He started to read it aloud. He didn't finish. He just closed the journal carefully, reached over, and gripped her arm. "We need to call the police," he said. "Right now." The journal was dated that morning's. "Let's just take a breath for a second. You and me. If you're watching this at night, first of all, bold choice. Genuinely, I respect the commitment. Second, I want you to do something for me. Look out your window right now. Whatever window is nearest to you. Just look. Take a few seconds. I'll wait. Okay. Good. Nothing there. Probably. If this is hitting close to home, and based on the comments on the last episode, I know for some of you it genuinely is, drop your story below. I read everything. My team flags submissions that match patterns we've documented across multiple cases, and what we've been seeing lately in the backyard category specifically is something I'm going to be addressing in a future episode. So stay tuned for that. Share this one if you know someone who needs to hear it, or someone who absolutely doesn't, but you want to ruin their evening. Both are valid. Now, story 3. This last one was submitted anonymously. The person made me promise not to reveal the location. By the end, you'll understand why in 3 years of running this channel, I have received thousands of submissions. I have read accounts of things that have genuinely altered the way I move through the world, the way I check rooms, the way I sit with my back to walls, the way I no longer assume that a quiet house is a safe one. I have become, out of professional necessity, difficult to rattle. This one rattled me. I'm going to refer to the person who sent this as the sender. That's their request, and I'm honoring it without negotiation. No pronouns, no location, no identifying details of any kind. If that feels frustrating, I understand. But by the time we get to the end of this, you'll understand why I'm not pushing back on those conditions. The sender moved into their age. The storm came on October 3rd. For the first 10 nights of recording, the footage showed nothing. The gate stayed closed. The yard stayed empty. Pike still watched the fence at dusk, but even he seemed less certain of himself, like he was beginning to doubt his own instincts. The sender started reviewing Fu at 1:47 a.m. A figure came over the back fence. Not through the gate. Over it with a fluid, practiced ease that suggested someone who had done it many times before. The figure dropped into the yard, stood still for a moment, then walked slowly and deliberately to the center of the lawn, and stopped. For exactly 22 minutes, it stood there, unmoving, facing the house. Then it turned, walked back to the fence, climbed over, and was gone. The Cinder watched this footage 4 times before they could process it. Then they checked the next night's recording. Same figure, same spot, same 22 minutes, to within seconds. This continued for 19 consecutive nights. Same entry point, same position in the yard, same duration 22 minutes, measured, unwavering before it left exactly the way it came. The Cinder stopped sleeping in any meaningful sense. They reviewed footage each morning with the hollow mechanical focus of someone running on adrenaline and dread, confirming what they already knew they were going to find. On night 17, the figure did something different. At the 18-minute mark, it turned its head slowly upward toward the camera mounted above the back door. It looked directly into the lens for a long, still moment. Then it raised one hand and waved. Not frantically, not threateningly. A slow, deliberate wave. The kind you give someone you know. The Cinder included a screenshot of that frame in their submission. I opened it once, late at night, alone in my office. I looked at it for about 4 seconds. I haven't looked again. By the third autumn, the Cinder had developed what they described, without any apparent irony, as a system. Enough. That's what makes these stories different. I open tonight by saying that most people think the scariest things in the world are hiding somewhere far away. Abandoned places, remote places, places you have to choose to go. And I meant what I said. Oh, they're wrong. Because you can choose not to go to the abandoned hospital. You can avoid the forest, skip the remote town, stay on the main road. What you cannot do is stop going home. You cannot opt out of your own backyard. You cannot unknow the swing set, the garden shed, the fence line you've looked at 1,000 times and never looked at closely. That's what makes them stay. Dale, my old neighbor who used to say I had the best lot on the block, moved away 2 years ago. Quietly, quickly. He never told me why, and I never asked. I've thought about that a lot lately. Some things you just don't push. Now, before you go, what I find interesting and deeply unsettling is that all 3 of tonight's stories share one detail I haven't mentioned yet. One specific, verifiable thread that connects Marcus's tree line, ours garden shed, and the Cinder's backyard into something that I don't think is coincidence. I've been sitting on it for weeks, cross-referencing, making sure I have it right before I put it in front of you. I'm saving it for the next episode. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I mean that more than I usually do. And if you have a story of your own, something that happened in your yard, your neighborhood, somewhere close to home, my inbox is open. I read everything. I verify what I can. And if yours checks out, you might be the next case. Sleep well. Lock your doors. And maybe, don't look out the back window tonight.